Hi, y'all. Welcome back this week. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We're powered by Safra Leadership. Safra is a cohort based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Lindsay Gray, and this is Mindy Gulati. We're the co founders of Safra. Together, we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. Today, we're going to talk about the human side of work when life comes to the office. So we're going to talk about when things like illness, death, divorce, unexpected news in the family, issues with friends, other things all come and affect the way that we lead, the way that we perform, and the way that we move about the world. So, hi, Mindy.
Hi. Excited to be here. Tough topic, but such a relevant and important topic because all of us are people and all of us come to work with our lived experience. And I think today will be interesting. We'd love to hear from you if you have comments or thoughts as we go. Lindsay, I was just telling you recently that the way that I start a lot of my workshops or strategy sessions, I just did a big board meeting 2 days ago, like a half-day strategic alignment session. And I ask this question almost every meeting or workshop that I have. And I put up this slide, and the first question to the audience is always, how are you showing up today? And what I'm asking people to do is just take a minute and say, how am I showing up? Like, am I excited? Am I interested? But more than that, like, what's going on in the background? Like, did I have a fight with my child on the way to school? And so I'm frustrated. Am I really stressed about something? Do I have a big, decision to make at home? And so I'm distracted. And then the next question I ask, so first I ask, how are you showing up? And then I ask, how is that going to affect you? So for example, with this board that I was meeting with, I asked these two questions and I said, think about how that emotion is going to affect you. And one guy had just come back from a trip to Disney World. And I kind of called him out and I was like, hey, like, you've been at Disney World for 4 days, like really think about it. And he said, actually, I'm like really excited because I feel very focused now back at work. But some people could be tired or overwhelmed. And so I really, what we want to focus on today is like taking that temperature of yourself, both as an individual, but as a leader. How do you show up? How does that affect your experience? And we're going to center that on these things that happen in life.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's great to start that way because we're all human. So we can ignore it, that fact, but it's real. Doesn't make it any less real. Mindy, what's an example of a time where you have either led in a situation where someone else has experienced life coming to the office, or when you yourself have had that happen? Can you think of, an example that you want to share?
Yeah, I'll share sort of where I was leading alongside somebody who was going through a difficult situation. And this happened to be a chief people officer who's highly on top of it, typically, very organized, very diligent in timelines and deadlines, and gets her work done. And she's the chief people officer, so she leads a big team. She has a very important job on the executive team. But earlier this year, her mom got sick, and she had to, and kind of unexpectedly, moved her mom into a care center, like a assisted living center. Her dad got sick right after, moved him into the assisted care center. And so during this time, it was a lot of emotions, but she was still getting things done, but we had to sort of help her out, fill in. But then her dad passed away. And it was like the grief was enormous. And she was really, I would say, like out of commission for a long period of time. And what I think was important here is that, it was unexpected, as is most of these life events that we encounter. But she is the leader, like she is the top of the ticket over here. And so it was interesting to watch, though, because what both the company and her team did is they gave her the space throughout this whole duration, which I think was weeks long, really, of knowing that when you say, how are you showing up today and how is that going to affect you? She's showing up under immense pressure, grief, sadness, and everyone knew that. And she was open about it. But then we had to deal with the reality of, things have to get done. Like we can't just stop working. And so I found the experience to be really interesting in that everybody stepped up to the plate. And so her leaders, the people that report to her, they became, I think, more effective leaders. And I think that's one little place I want to veer off here is a lot of times we as leaders feel like we have to be in control of everything, and we have to be on top of everything. And sometimes life is going to hit you and you cannot be on top of everything. But what that often does is give others an opportunity to step in. And so watching this experience, I think it was a real good case study of she was not mentally or emotionally able to be at work. She could come check in. But what happened is her team stepped up. And the reason they were able to step up is because she is a great leader. And so she was equipping them. But sometimes as leaders, we feel like, oh, I just got to bury everything. And I shouldn't talk about this. And I should just keep going forward. But you know what? Sometimes you really can't, like even as much as you would want to will that. But then you give people an opportunity to step up. And now you've grown their skills. And now you've grown their ability. And as someone who was working alongside her, I don't work for her, but I work alongside her. It was really just checking on her, giving her the space, but also I knew that we had to get some things done and gently saying, hey, we need to get this out the door. I'm going to talk to this person, any opposition to that. So I still gave her agency, but I knew we had to just get some things done. But it was really tough to watch. So that's sort of a recent, as a leader and as someone working along someone going through grief and loss. But what about you? Do you have any real life examples from your life or from work?
Yeah, I mean, the one that comes to mind is heavy, but not in a grief kind of way. So in early 2023, one night I was at home and I received a phone call from my brother letting me know that it had been discovered that he and I have a half sibling that we never knew about. And I was 39 years old at the time. He's 2 years younger than me. So, had lived our entire adult lives this far, not knowing about our sister. And I was not in a mess in terms of sad or grieving. It was more, I was extremely distracted. All I could think, I had so many questions, as you can imagine.
I would, yes.
So many questions, and trying to navigate, how am I going to have these various conversations? I think I want to meet my sister. How do I do that? What's the first step? Who is this person? The timing of it was just all of these things. And it really greatly inhibited my ability to work for let's say 3 to 5 work days, where I just couldn't think of much else. And so, I tend to be sort of on the spectrum of over disclose versus under disclose. I tend to be closer to my team and communicate more. And so I was able to communicate, the folks that were close on my team, sort of what was going on, and able to sort of give myself the grace of I'm just going to do the things that have to get done on my checklist and kind of push things off until the next week, because I am so distracted. I can't function very well as a working adult.
Yeah.
And luckily my team was super gracious. Also oh, tell me more. And
they love that gossip, I'm sure.
I know, all is well. I'm very close with my sister today. But it was definitely a wild time, and affected my ability to work for sure.
Well, and I think your example is really interesting because I think a lot of times, we think about what are the things that are going to impact our team at work. And we think about oh yeah, if someone dies, that's going to be significant.
Yeah.
And there's bereavement leave, and there's standard sort of practice around this. But when you move to things that aren't death or maybe illness, but you move to things like an unexpected sibling or a divorce, or your child maybe is being bullied, or you're having difficulties with your in-laws or something, we don't have like work language around that,
Yeah.
but that's very, very common, that the people that you're leading are going through these personal struggles that aren't like a big thing, like a death or a diagnosis of an illness, but it's like, oh, I discovered a sister, or I'm thinking about getting a divorce, or my child is in a tough spot. And so I think it's interesting because, we, and Lindsay, we can talk about some tips and tools kind of in a minute, but what I think is interesting, what you said, is like this self-disclosure. Like, how do we talk about this when we do have the sibling, the divorce, the child at home? Like, how much do we disclose at work? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think we as women are in a bit of a double bind on self-disclosure, right? On the one hand, we can be viewed as like too emotional, or we bring too much of our personal lives to work, but then we are absolutely expected to have some level of self-disclosure. People expect women to like talk about their kids and things like that, whereas they don't objectively just don't have the same expectations of men. Otherwise, we can be viewed as cold. It's really an interesting double bind, and so we have to think about that as we think about self-disclosure. But then there is a continuum, and I think that is, such a personal thing, and also depends on like the specific relationship, right? There are certain colleagues you'll tell more things to than others, and so we have to sort of hedge that and make strategic decisions about that, but hopefully in a comfortable way that's not too onerous. And then we have to think about how we lead to foster those things, foster community at work without getting, too far potentially where, we have less boundaries than we should, or where it's just taking up too much space at work. What are your thoughts, Mindy?
Yeah, and I think we always say in our podcast when we talk about these topics, like, everyone's very different, and so you have to understand the complexity of people. So not everybody wants to disclose everything that's going on, and for a while there's been this topic or this saying, like, bring your whole self to work and be vulnerable, and that means a lot of things to different people, because some of us don't want to bring our whole selves to work because we've been hit with it. We've been punished in some way. And some of us love to bring our whole selves to work, but we have been in a supportive place. And so as a leader, you have to get to know your team. And I actually think one of the ways to do this is not only in one-on-one conversations, but start meetings and say, how are you showing up today? And how might that affect your experience? Those two questions, even with a new team, even with new people, you can just start that awareness, and then people, may feel like they can trust. But I also think you have to be careful not expecting people to disclose what's going on in their lives, especially women. And it's interesting because, Lindsay, I hadn't thought about this in so long till you were just talking. And when I was first married, my husband got a new job. Like, we were just barely married, and he's like, he loved that we got married. He was so excited, and he took our wedding picture and put it on his desk, and his boss came in and said, like, what the fuck is this? Like, get this out of here. This is so stupid that you would bring your wedding picture. Like, who are you? Like, and was so mean to him.
Wow.
And it actually, like, it was very consequential. It like really hurt his feelings. And I know that if a woman would have brought that picture in, I know the outcome would have been different. And so women are expected that, and men are not in a lot of, and that's a generality, but I do think it's interesting because, like, for him at that workplace, he could not bring in what was going on in his life. And I do think that there are, I'm going to talk about law firms for a minute. I do think law firms can be a place where people don't feel like they can bring in what's going on outside, or they're going to be judged. And I work with a lot of lawyers and coach a lot of lawyers, and they are going through things and they don't disclose them to their, to the partners or to their colleagues because they're scared that they're going to be judged. And so I think that, like, I'm an open book. I share freely about what's going on in my life. I always ask myself, how am I showing up? If I'm going to show up in a really terrible way, I will also cancel a meeting. That's one pro tip, is like, if I am too distracted, or I am this is not going to be great for everybody involved, like I will just cancel the meeting. But I always am sensitive to not everyone's going to share that. So by asking people to be aware, how are you showing up? How might that affect you? They can just say, hey, something's going on in my life and I'm distracted today. And they don't necessarily have to share everything with you, but it makes the team feel more connected.
Yeah. And oftentimes, especially when you work with people every day, like it's similar to what we said at the beginning. It's like you can ignore it, but it doesn't make it any less real. When you work with people every day, you're likely to notice if something is off with them.
Yeah.
And so, I really love the way you framed it towards the beginning, Mindy, where it's like, you can say, I'm just having a really tough day, or I'm really distracted, or you can give more detail. It's totally up to you. But oftentimes when you feel a little off for whatever reason, it can be helpful to say that so that people understand that and sort of level set with that in mind.
Yeah. And as a leader, if you do that, you make it a safe place for people to do it back to you. And so, one of the tips, and it's sort of around the bucket of psychological safety, it's also just about building a strong relationship and trust on your team, is be the first one to offer the vulnerability. And it doesn't mean you have to tell them everything that's going on, but you can simply say, I had a really rough morning, or I have some things going on that are really distracting me. So, if I'm not being clear, or if you feel like I'm impatient, just let me know, but also understand I have a lot going on. It can be as simple as that, or you can pull the person inside and say, hey, I am going through some marital problems and this is really tough for me. And to your point on people can tell, it's really interesting because last summer, I went through a very stressful situation personally. And one of my clients called me, and she said, I just get this sense you're really distracted right now. Like, can I help you in any way? And it was scary to me because I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm not, like, they can tell. I'm not on, and they can tell. And so at first I was like a little like, oh no, I've messed up. But then as she talked, she was like, look, you've been working for us for a long time and you're our consultant. We care about you. And so are you okay? And it was just a genuine, are you okay? Yeah. And then I said, no, I'm not okay. And I was open with what was going on, but she and I have the closest sort of client, relationship now, where that vulnerable moment, kind of on both of our ends, just we're like, so we trust each other so much now, and actually our work has become even better together. So people will notice. That's why you can't just say like everything's fine, because humans can pick up on that energy and that feeling. Any other kind of tips you have for like balancing when people have something going on but you still need to get work done?
I mean, I think this is really tough. It can be really tough. So, for example, if you're in a meeting or in a group setting where you're trying to get something done and someone is talking about a personal issue or something that's going on, sometimes there becomes a point where you have to say like, hey guys, like, let's maybe like set aside another time, or like we can chat after work or whatever. But right now we have to sort of like move the ball forward on the work stuff. And that can be really hard depending on what it is. And sometimes folks need more time than just a couple of days to like, check off their to-do list. I mean, similar to the story you told. And so I think one of the things, Mindy, we talked briefly about before we hopped on was like sort of looking ahead, but doing things in phases, right? Like if an emergency happens, let's say someone has a family member that gets sick, it's like you triage for a few days, but then you realize like, maybe this isn't just going to last 3 days. Maybe this is going to last longer than that. And I think, some general tips are like, always be looking one step ahead. You don't, to the extent possible, like you don't want to be surprised, right? That someone isn't able to show up in the ways that are needed to sort of move the ball forward in the way that it needs to. And so, but then also be transparent with the person that's struggling with the personal challenge. I mean, one way I love to think about it is you're not sitting across each other at the table talking about that person's problem. You're sitting on the same side of the table looking together at the challenge and trying to come up with a solution. And so when someone is struggling personally, you can look across the table and say, hey, we have these 5 things that have to get done in the next month, let's say. Like, talk to me about what's reasonable, and we can come to an agreement and like figure this out together. And I get that's hard when someone is showing up with less than their sort of like full on self. But I think those conversations have to be had because sometimes there's a level of transparency you need to give to the colleague, and sometimes you need that from them, right? It's like, I need to know if in 2 weeks you're going to be able to show up fully, or at least whether you can expect that you will, you know, so that I can help you and help the team make plans so that we can keep the train moving.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to mention, sort of a tip, and it goes along with what you're saying, is when someone on your team is going through, you know, whether it's a death, an illness, a divorce, a long lost sibling, you know, unexpected news, some sort of stress, you want to give them agency. So you want to ask them, what do they need? What realistically can you provide? So be honest. If they're like, I need 6 months off, you know, and that's not in the cards. But also, I would encourage you to ask them how you would like their situation to be addressed with the rest of the team. Because there is actually, I'm thinking of a lawyer. He was a younger associate, and he was sort of like a shining star at the firm, getting put on the biggest cases. He was probably 3 year in, and he got diagnosed with a very serious illness. And he came to me because I do coaching for his firm. And he said, you know, I want to come to work and just work, because I am so stressed about what's happening to me that I find work to be like a reprieve. And he asked me, he said, can you just tell the partners that, like, I'd love for them to just talk to me like I'm a normal colleague again. I don't want to talk about my illness because it's so scary. And so you need to ask people, like, if there is a death, if there is an illness, like, ask them, like, how do you want us to address this? Because some people would be like, oh, I need to talk about it. It's important to me. But he wanted to come to work and escape his situation. And so that's why we have to ask people, like, how do you want us to talk about this? What do you want us to say? What are you okay? Don't just talk about it how you think is right. Make sure that person is included.
Yeah, totally. And that can change, right? One day I may show up and be like, I just want to escape. And then the week later, I may show up and be like, I got to talk about this, you know, and that's okay too. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, you know, I'd love, please comment or share kind of your tips and tools. As leaders, we have so much to contend with because we have the deadlines, we have the to-do list, we have to keep the machine running. But we're dealing with people and things happen, and all of us would want the space when we need it. And we need it. You needed a few days off. Some people need weeks. Some people, you know, need someone to just give them a day to breathe. But you know, I think the main message is really that, you know, get to know people, let people be who they are and how they show up, but also understand that our lives don't just stop when we walk into work. All of this stuff comes with us. Yeah.
They certainly do not. All right. Well, thanks everybody for showing up today, and we will see you back next week.
Bye. Take care, everyone.